perhaps the most important thing you need to know before you start a research project is, have you asked a question that you can actually answer? Is your question a scientific one? Now, lots of people disguise their questions to make it look scientific when they aren't. But it's really important that you actually have an answerable question. So the learning outcome for this short presentation is you're going to understand what a scientific question is and be able to ask one. So research methods is important because some of you want to be scientists. Even if you don't want to be scientists, then you want to be a critical thinker. You want to be able to evaluate things that are going on in the world around you. And you should make right sort of decisions. Do you want to respond to emails about your bank details? Even a more fundamental question to you is, are you on the right degree program? If you think, well, I really prefer marine biology and you're doing biomedical sciences, then possibly you're not. You have to give yourself the best possible future. So understanding the world around you is really important. Now, humans plan for the future. We make models in our minds imagining what can happen. We tell stories, we share experience. Terry Pratchett created this idea, which is pan-narrans, which is we're always telling stories to one another to rationalise the world around us. So ancient times, people used to see nature and they put animated creatures into nature to explain it. So when they saw fire, they created fire demons or fire spirits, and rivers had water spirits. They created stories to explain how everything worked. But that's not very useful. We want to have more intelligent kind of questions than that. We want to predict what will happen if we do this. So, back to my Paleolithic hunter-gatherer, how can I hunt my mammoth? Well, doing it on my own doesn't work, need a group. Which berries are good to eat? Now this is where writing and communication really came in. Because you don't want to be going around and testing out all the berries on all the plants, and then you eat one and you go, oh, this one made me sick. No, it didn't just make me sick, it killed me. You can't pass that information to other people. So making stories about things is a good way of preventing people having a very negative experience, like which mushrooms make me sick. We know that the ones that are red on the top with all the white dots on them, these are bad because we've had fairy tales where those are always the ones that kill the heroine or the hero in the fairy story. So more modern versions are, does this drug make you better? We want explanations for why people get sick. So I didn't realise that often there's a difference between the disease, the clinical manifestation, and the doctor's identification of the causative agent. So when they say this person has syphilis, that is the set of symptoms, and because the actual causative agent is something called the Treponema species, but they cause other diseases apart from syphilis as well. So for example, we're going to look at scurvy. So scurvy is a vitamin C deficiency. Malaria, I used to study, that's spread by mosquitoes, the same as yellow fever. Cholera is spread by contaminated water. Cancer is tricky because it is many different causes. So part of it is aging processes, some of it is triggered by viruses. There are many other aspects to cancer, genetic effects. And there's something like Ebola or COVID, which we know are viruses. Although people make silly mistakes over what causes diseases, like influenza is not caused by Haemophilia influenzae bacteria. So how do we make predictions? Make predictions based on experience. Someone had to, in the past, eat the poisonous mushroom and berry and die, or get very ill. Someone realised that hunting a marathon, you'll only get squashed. Someone had to test out how diseases were spread. So the person who tested out yellow fever was spread by mosquitoes. He allowed himself to be infected by mosquitoes from the yellow fever area. Unfortunately, he died in the experiment. If you have patients with infections, you give them an antibiotic, they get better, so that works. So you have to rationalize and manage your experiences, and that's what science is. That's why we do experiments. We don't just rely on anecdotes. So you'll often see it's said on the internet, anecdote doesn't prove anything. So what kind of questions can we ask? What are the question words? There's how, what, when, where, why. So we could ask, how does DNA encode information? We worked out the genetic code, we work out genes work. What causes blood pressure to rise? I don't know, lots of different things in my case, usually administration. When do birds migrate? Do they always migrate at the same time? You can get more specific in your questions. Is climate change changing the way when birds migrate, or even if they migrate at all? Where does the citric acid cycle take place? That might be a simpler and much more defined answer, except then you'll find an exception somewhere, some creature where it doesn't take place where you thought it did. Does this treatment have an effect? Well, it might work on that group, but it might not work with every single group, as you've read in the book. And then you just wonder why things work. Living things are really... I wonder why living things are living. So a scientific question is one that can be proved or disproved. Now, if you're going to follow Karl Popper's idea, then it just means you have to be able to disprove it. You have to have a test for it. You have to be able to collect evidence and know whether this is true or false. So an example. The Beatles are the most influential band ever. That's not a scientific question. We can't say yes or no to that. How do you measure influence? The Beatles sold more albums than any other group. That is a scientific question. I can go out, I can count something, I can say, yes, they sold more than everyone else. Lindt chocolate is the best chocolate that exists. Now, I 100% agree with this. But unfortunately, that's a non-scientific question. Different people have different tastes. Some people like Lindt, some people hate it. More people buy Lindt than any other brand. I can test that as a scientific question. The answer to it is no, because it's ridiculously expensive, but it's a scientific question nevertheless. Now, here's a more complicated question. How many people think that veganism is the only way to save the planet? In this case, this is going to be a scientific question, because you can find out how many people. But there's still questions about how many people, so you can find out how many people think that. But the problem and the extra confusion is, what does it mean by saving the planet? How could you make it more rigorous and scientific in the way you ask the question? So comparing people's opinions between two different groups, that's fine. That becomes a scientific question. So if I said, Lindt chocolate is the best chocolate that exists, do more people in England think that Lindt chocolate is the best chocolate that exists compared to in Scotland? That becomes a scientific question. Now, other kinds of questions we ask in science is when we're looking for what causes something to happen. So this happens in disease, and particularly things like, does smoking cause cancer? Now, proving causes is really quite difficult. You have to design your experiments very well, and sometimes experiments are not really possible. So other examples of questions: does not drying your hair after swimming cause colds? The amount of children who have arguments with parents about that. Are humans causing climate change? Is carbon dioxide a greenhouse gas? Does it cause atmospheric heating? So the fourth one of these, the last one, is carbon dioxide a greenhouse gas? That we can answer. Put carbon dioxide in a bottle, expose it to radiation, see that it heats up. But the other questions, they're more challenging. And it's harder for you to prove a link from one thing to the other. So the way it usually begins is you gather evidence. So anecdotes, while they don't prove something, they are usually the point where you start from. That's where you find the question. Then you need to be systematic and actually go and do more rigorous evidence collecting. You can show association that smokers get cancer, so they realised that all the people who came with oral cancers in the 1890s, they were all people who smoked cigars. So even over 100 years ago, we knew that there was some kind of link. But then you're looking for counterexamples. So you're saying, well, this person smoked all their life, they never got cancer, so it can't cause cancer. And then you're looking for people saying, well, they never smoked ever in their life, but they got cancer anyway. So maybe smoking doesn't cause cancer. So you have to weigh the evidence for each of your different examples. So research method is about managing these experiences, collecting the data, and doing science. It's fundamental module to your developing your scientific understanding. It includes critical thinking, experimental design, and data analysis. Now, as we go forward in biology, data analysis is going to become much more important because we're doing big data biology. We're using experimental techniques which don't just do single experiments, but they do thousands or tens of thousands in parallel. And so we're taking and collecting all that data together. So, a quote from Richard Feynman: "Science is the belief in the ignorance of experts." You will change the way we see the world because we will learn more. So don't always believe what you read in the textbook, because it might turn out that it isn't right in the end. But don't also be overly cynical and don't distrust absolutely everything.